Chapter 2430, The Purple Cloud Mushroom, 3. After a brief examination, Gu Shijio could already assess the extent of his injury. Di Fui, am I not important to you at all? Why are you still trying to look tough even at this critical point? She complained. Di Fui sighed. I do not want you to be worried. As a proud man, he did not want to be exposed in his moment of weakness in front of his woman. Moreover, he knew he could handle the injury. All he needed was time. Although he was not even 10 years old yet, he was physically and mentally an adult. He wanted to be a man that she could count on. A man should do everything he can to keep his woman away from trouble. On top of those reasons, he definitely did not want Gu Shijio to see him as a child. Therefore, he needed to show her his best self. His character was somewhat different from Celestial Masters was from the past. After all, Celestial Masters had lived long enough to understand the realities of life. He did not care about anything at all, so he would do anything as he pleased. The teenage Di Fui was still different and cared about how Gu Shijio perceived him. Gu Shijio looked at him intensely and said, "There is no need for you to act so strong in front of me. I will not laugh at you." She started to try to treat the wound. Di Fui found her words somewhat familiar to him. It was like déjà vu. Curious, he started to make some mental calculations. Huang Tu must have been more than 10,000 years old before he was immortalized, and Gu Shijio was only about 200 years old now. Deducting her years in heaven, they must have met when she was only a teenager. A man that old must have found Gu Shijio to be only a child at that age. Di Fui knew how much he cared for Gu Shijio in his previous life. A woman like her, who was both strong and independent, would not ask for his help so easily, so he must have told her the same thing many times before. Their situations now were the opposite of how they were before. He used to be jealous of his previous self, but things were slightly different now. Whether he was Huang Tu or Di Fui, she had fallen in love with him again without any confirmation of his actual identity. Her love for him was genuine. No obstacle could keep them apart anymore. Di Fui was ecstatic by the thought. In fact, he was so happy that he could not even feel the pressure on his wound. He was smiling the whole time. Gu Shijio was using her spiritual power to put pressure on his wound in an attempt to draw the toxic blood out of his body by force. She knew that the process could be quite painful and was worried that he might not be able to take it. Therefore, she was surprised by the big smile on his face. "What are you laughing at? Is this not painful?" How could he not feel any pain? Di Fui answered very seriously, "It is painful. Baby, shower me with love, and it will be all right." Seeing that he was still in the mood to joke around, she believed that he must be able to manage the pain. Therefore, Gu Shijio decided to continue the treatment without any concern. However, having been brought back to reality, Di Fui finally realized that he could no longer take the pain. "Baby, can you be slightly gentle with me? It is painful." Gu Shijio teased him, "It would be better for you if I pushed harder." Fortunately for the man, she did not really mean it, and he could instantly tell that she was gentler with him. The firmament stone suddenly interrupted her during the treatment. "I am not overthinking. I am not overthinking." Gu Shijio was speechless. She raised her arm and sealed away all of the firmament stone's senses. Gu Shijio looked down and caught Di Fui watching her intensely. Her heart skipped a beat. She was undoubtedly left in awe of his charm. She was surprised that he could make her heart race even without uttering a word. "Shijio! Shijio!" There was a voice coming from behind the carriage. It was Yun Yanli. "What is the matter?" Gu Shijio responded, calmly. "Is Prince Nyanma all right?" Yun Yanli seemed concerned. He was actually worried that Gu Shijio and Di Fui might teleport away, so he needed to initiate a random conversation with them to make sure that they were still in the carriage. "I am not okay." Di Fui suddenly interrupted. "I am so weak that I am now on the brink of dying. Would you like to come over here and have a look?" His firm and sarcastic tone would have certainly misled any audience about his actual current condition. Yun Yanli gave him an awkward response, "Prince Nyanma, you must be joking." Di Fui simply answered, "Am I?" Yun Yanli felt that the conversation was meaningless. He felt as though the man was mocking him, but could not voice his dissatisfaction. He politely ended the conversation and decided not to talk between the carriages. In fact, he had already set up a small wizardry barrier that surrounded Gu Zijia's entire carriage. If she used her teleportation skill, the wizardry barrier would immediately alert Yun Yanli of the situation. He suspected that Gu Shijio had unraveled part of the truth and that Di Fui was severely injured from the events in the poisonous swamp, so the wizardry barrier was actually a test. If Gu Shijio had indeed found out the truth, he believed that she would definitely teleport away with Di Fui to safety, given Di Fui's condition. However, instead of running away, Gu Shijio and Di Fui stayed. Hence, it was safe to assume that they were unaware of his plot. The main problem that he had was that Di Fui knew exactly how Yun Yanli felt about him. They had an intense discussion the last time they had met. Since Di Fui did not seem to have the intention to leave, Yun Yanli immediately assumed that Di Fui must have thought that he was strong enough to fight him right now. Either that or he must be thinking that Yun Yanli would not dare to touch him in front of Gu Shijio. Did Di Fui really think that Yun Yanli could not do anything to him because of Gu Zijia's presence? From their brief encounter, Yun Yanli was unable to assess Di Fui's level of kung fu. Moreover, Di Fui had refused to show off his strength, so there was no way Yun Yanli could tell how powerful the 10-year-old had become. Before they arrived at their destination, Gu Shijio managed to give Di Fui a thorough detoxification. She helped him up and asked hoarsely, "How do you feel?" "Much better," Di Fui reassured. Then, he sat with his legs crossed and started meditating. The place was so scarce of spiritual energy, so Di Fui needed the help of a spiritual stone and some Chinese herbs to restore his spiritual power. The spiritual stone that he currently possessed was a very rare find of the highest quality. Upon absorption, the spiritual stone was able to restore at least a tenth of his spiritual power. However, as the spiritual stone was formed through the ferocious beast's internal alchemy, the stone bore a high level of impurities. Hence, Di Fui would need to cleanse the stone before absorption, but was too weak to do so this time. Consequently, he required the 1,000-year-old glossy Ganoderma to cleanse the stone. Gu Shijio saw the glossy Ganoderma and was suddenly inspired. She dug into her storage bag and found a small bottle. A red pill that was the size of a red bean rolled onto her palm. She offered it to him. "Would you like to try this medicine?" The pill was produced from the rare purple cloud mushroom and was extremely powerful. Consuming a single pill had the power to increase one's spiritual power tremendously. However, she was worried that Di Fui might be reluctant to consume it as he had refused her offer a few times before. Di Fui studied the pill briefly before graciously accepting it. The pill rolled onto his palm, reflecting light on its shiny surface with every turn. Its faint scent was certainly inviting. Di Fui was surprised to find that the scent of the pill somewhat reminded him of the scent of his soul. It was a familiar, distinctive kind of smell. "Did Huang Tu make these pills?" he asked. Gu Shijio shook her head. "No, I was the one who made the pills. It was produced from a special type of herb found from the place where I am from." Di Fui said nothing more and stared at the pill fixedly. Gu Shijio then said awkwardly, "If you are reluctant to take the pill, I can." Before Gu Shijio took the pill back, Di Fui quickly popped it straight into his mouth. Gu Shijio was astonished that he consumed it. She was now hopeful. "Sit properly. I shall transfer some spiritual power to help you absorb it better." The pill was immensely powerful, carrying a pure source of spiritual power. However, there was something deadly about the pill. It was incredibly difficult to absorb. The source of the spiritual power was so great that once it entered the body of the person who consumed it, it would cause a raging storm that filled every tiny stream instantaneously. One mistake could cost his life. After swallowing the pill, he needed to conceal the power in a bubble and absorb it bit by bit. The pill had to be digested very slowly, so he could slowly absorb its spiritual power. The process was much more complicated than the absorption of a spiritual stone. Usually, the complete absorption of the pill would take at least 6 days and 6 nights. It also required the receiver to meditate and transfer the energy throughout his or her body. It was guaranteed to increase the individual's spiritual power significantly, so the price was definitely worth the trouble. Gu Shijio wanted to wait until they had more time to give him the pill, but desperate times called for desperate measures. It was a risk that she had to take. Di Fuya's body had barely any spiritual power left, so he would not be able to use his own power to control and absorb the pill. Thus, Gu Shijio stepped in to help. She knew exactly how the pill would react, hence, she could certainly facilitate the absorption process. Gu Shijio had briefly calculated the time needed to travel from the swamp to Lagua City. With the speed of the carriage, they would need at least a day. A day was all she needed to help him absorb the pill. Since Gu Shijio offered to help, Di Fui would certainly not be opposed to it. He did as told and sat with his legs crossed in front of her. In sync, they pressed their palms together. Gu Shijio was worried that she might hurt him, so she carefully transferred her spiritual power into his body and slowly traced his veins down to his stomach. She tried to locate the pill. Surprisingly, she could not find it. What had gone wrong? Gu Shijio continued to search his body but still found nothing. Did you swallow it? I did. Is it stuck in your gullet? Of course not. What is the matter? Di Fui was surprised by the confused look on Gu Zijia's face. It is gone. Di Fui was stunned. Perhaps I have absorbed it on my own? Should it melt away as soon as it passes down my throat? When Di Fui swallowed the pill, he could feel a steady stream of heat slowly go down from his throat to his stomach. He could feel a brief sense of warmth in his stomach before the sensation disappeared entirely. It should be very difficult to digest. When I took the pill, I spent 3 days and 3 nights to absorb its power. Long Sai took even longer. He spent 8 days in total. Gu Shijio was very worried. She studied Di Fuya's body carefully, as she was concerned that the immense power would crush his veins at any second. To her surprise, Di Fui looked completely normal. In fact, he looked slightly better than how he was before. How do you feel? Di Fui tried to sense the power in his body and shook his head. I don't feel different. Gu Shijio was even more worried now. Under normal circumstances, he should be able to feel the heat in his body within minutes of taking the pill. There should at least be sweat coming out of his face and body. Had the pill lost its effectiveness over time? Or was it on the brink of exploding inside his body? Once activated, it should take over his body like a raging storm. Gu Shijio was in a state of panic. She felt as though she had placed a bomb in his stomach that she could not even locate. She forced him to sit up straight so that she could assess him carefully. Determined, she used her spiritual power and traced every inch of his body to find it. However, the result was the same, fruitless. The pill had disappeared entirely without a trace. Due to this discovery, Gu Shijio decided to stop the transfer of energy to his body, even though she was reluctant. Are you sure that you have swallowed it? She looked at him doubtfully and started to wonder if he was lying to her. Di Fui sighed as he pulled her into his arms. Why would I lie to you? You have to learn to trust me. It is quite abnormal for the pill to have completely disappeared without a trace. Gu Shijio was very confused. Perhaps the pill has lost its effectiveness. To Di Fuya's knowledge, it had been more than 200 years since the production of the pills. It could be the case that the pills had simply expired. Gu Shijio was somewhat dismayed by the revelation. It had been a while since she consumed the pill. However, her storage bag had the ability to keep things fresh. Normally, even food could be well preserved for at least 3 to 5 years in the bag. Why would the pills be any different? Was it because of her stay in the Shura world? There was a period where she lost her kung fu and no longer had access to her storage bag. Perhaps, it had lost its ability to keep her food and medicine fresh? Perplexed, Gu Shijio could not figure out why the pill did not work. Di Fui reached out to her and requested, "Give me another one. This time, I will taste it before swallowing it." Gu Shijio was surprised by his eagerness. Did he really think that the pill was some sort of ginseng herb that could be consumed repeatedly? No way. You can only consume one pill at a time. It cannot be overconsumed, otherwise, its power will crush your veins. The previous one was obviously ineffective. I cannot feel anything at all, so the pill did not work. Maybe the others are still good? We should at least try. Gu Shijio agreed but was still curious why the previous pill proved ineffective. She waited for an hour to observe him and could not see any change in his body. She examined his pulse and was sure that he was still doing the same as before. Finally, she agreed to give him another pill. This time, she took the best pill she could find. The pill looked excellent, round as a pearl and smooth as jade. It was gleaming with polish. She took a sniff of the pill and was able to recognize the faint scent around it. She was convinced that it would work this time. She watched Di Fui intently as he swallowed the pill. She could even see the pill move down his Adam's apple as soon as he swallowed the pill. Di Fui could not hide his amusement. "Baby, I do not feel very comfortable under your intense gaze." "How do you feel?" Gu Shijio was too worried to entertain him. Di Fui noticed some differences this time. "My stomach feels quite warm." This was how it should be. It seemed like the last pill was really ineffective and that this one was going to work just fine. Without wasting any time, Gu Shijio quickly pressed her palms against his and transferred some spiritual power to him. She tried to locate the precious pill in his body. She could finally locate the pill this time but was quite shocked by the result. In that brief moment, the pill was almost entirely absorbed by his body. From the size of a fingernail, it was reduced to almost the size of a green bean, leaving only 1/3 of the pill left in his stomach. At this rate, it would soon be completely digested. As soon as Gu Shijio came back to her senses, she tried to surround the pill in a bubble, but before she could form the protective layer, the pill was gone. Chapter 2434. The Source of the Spiritual Power. 3. Gu Shijio was astonished. Were his gastric juices abnormally strong? How could the absorption be so swift? What kind of powerful feature did his body possess? If the pill was digested so quickly, the spiritual power of the pill should have been transferred to his body. It should be accumulated at the core of his body by now. Gu Shijio carefully traced his veins. There was nothing wrong with his blood circulation. Additionally, everything in his system seemed smoothly regulated. However, she was disappointed as she could hardly feel any spiritual power in his body. It seemed that his body was a bottomless pit that managed to absorb the pill and its power along with it. The magical pill that worked wonders for her was obviously ineffective to him. Gu Shijio stood in a daze, trying to comprehend the situation. Di Fui was equally confused. "I have had one of these pills before and it worked very well for me back then. Have they lost their effectiveness in the Shura world?" Suddenly, he was reminded of a past incident. His mother once had a strange encounter where there was a bottomless pit in her body that would swallow all sources of spiritual power almost instantaneously, leaving her body with none. Finally, she found out that it was all because of a sinister being in her body. All of her spiritual power was drained to nourish the growth of the sinister being. Was the same sinister being in his body as well? The scary thought gave him a shudder. He tried to examine his body, but could not find anything odd. Gu Shijio carefully read his pulse and realized that his condition remained just the same. There was only a slight increase in his spiritual power, which was still very limited. The effect of the pill was even worse than the spiritual stone. Hence, perhaps the most logical explanation was that the pill had lost its power. Gu Shijio was ready to give up. She kept the pills away but was abruptly distracted by a sudden scream. "Watch out!" A man called out in a panic. "There are so many bloody bats. Quickly! Defend!" The chaos continued. Soon, the sound of a fierce battle could be heard. Gu Shijio was utterly surprised by the presence of the bats. These bloody bats would usually come right before the blood rain. Was the rain going to pour anytime soon? She flipped the curtain away, and the sight sent a shiver down her spine. A compact mass of bloody bats surrounded the top of the carriage. They spread themselves around the carriage, blotting out the sky and the sun. The notorious bats dived sharply from high altitudes towards the carriage, as if there was a precious treasure within it that was driving them crazy. There were already more than 70 of these bats approaching the carriage. Guardian Jean and Guardian Hua were fighting them off in a frenzy, killing the bats and turning them into pools of blood. However, there were undoubtedly too many for them to handle at once. Dozens of bloody bats finally found a way through and were likely to collide with Gu Shijio as soon as they approached. Gu Shijio unsheathed her sword. With a few swings, these bats were dead. However, that was just the beginning. A compact mass awaited them in the sky. If they all launched themselves toward the carriage at once, it would certainly spell the end for carriage. The carriage was not a concern for Gu Shijio. It was Di Fui that she was worried about. He barely had any strength left to defend himself. There was no way that he could fend off the bats. The rising sun was just about to shine its first faint streaks of dawn in the east, indicating the start of a new day. Chapter 2435. The Source of the Spiritual Power, 4. The presence of the bloody bats was certainly untimely. Was this all a trick by Yun Yanli? Gu Shijio took a quick look at Yun Yanli's carriage and was further convinced. There were no bats above his carriage, and even Zhu Duking's carriage as well. The bats were only attacking her carriage. Irritated, she was sure that Yun Yanli must be playing a trick on them. Thoroughly annoyed by the situation, she gave her finger a bite to cast an incantation with her blood. A wizardry barrier was immediately formed, surrounding the carriage in a safety bubble. These bloody bats plunged toward the carriage as a loud buzz swept across the sky. Luckily, the wizardry barrier was strong enough to withstand the impact. The barrier shook a little but did not break. At the same time, Yun Yanli finally emerged from his carriage. He looked confused as if waking up from a dream. The drowsy look on his face faded as soon as he caught the scary sight. "Shijio!" he called out in a panic. Swiftly, he approached the carriage. He seemed eager to help. Zhu Duqing came to help too. He stood on the top of his donkey-led carriage, summoning countless green stalks to spread across the sky and stop the plunging bats from impacting on the wizardry barrier. Yun Yanli was very fast as well. He made it right through the wizardry barrier and landed on top of the carriage. Those clueless bats were drawn by the man's entry and followed closely. Gu Shijio clenched her fists in frustration. The man did it on purpose. Gu Shijio took a few swings to kill some of the attacking bats before rushing back into the carriage. Yun Yanli was caught by surprise from her sudden retreat but did not enter with her. He continued to fight the bats. "Shijio, don't worry. I will kill these bats for you," he reassured. He swung his sword quickly and accurately. Many tiny swords seemed to emerge on his blade, making his every attack more lethal. As his kung fu was powerful, the bats were afraid to get any closer. His blue robes fluttered gracefully in the breeze with his every move. It was a rather attractive sight. "Brother Yun, you have such powerful kung fu." He could hear a voice that was accompanied by applause. Surprised, he quickly looked to the source of the voice, only to see Gu Shijio standing on top of his carriage instead of her own. She was smiling and cheering for him. Apparently, Gu Shijio had teleported with Di Fui into Yun Yanli's carriage. Di Fui sat uncomfortably in the wagon and was looking at Yun Yanli with added interest. When their eyes met, Di Fui smiled at Yun Yanli and said, "Thank you, Mr. Yun." Yun Yanli was speechless. Meanwhile, the bats seemed to have lost interest in the carriage as soon as the two of them had moved out. After a long, fruitless struggle, the bats finally left, and the carriage was left unharmed. Fortunately, Guardians Jean and Hua were only slightly injured. The bloody bats were actually very poisonous. A bite or a scratch was already enough to cause them harm. Nonetheless, thanks to the long-lasting effect of the antitoxin in their bodies, they were both fine and only suffered some minor scratches. "Shijio, are you all right?" Yun Yanli returned to his carriage and asked keenly. "I am fine, more traumatized than hurt." With a smile, Gu Shijio continued, "These bats were obviously scared of you. They ran away as soon as you approached." It was evident from her tone that Gu Shijio was very scornful. Hesitantly, Yun Yanli stared at her with a serious expression. "Shijio, did you suspect that I was the one who summoned the bats?" Gu Shijio denied his accusation. "I did not." It was true that she did not suspect that he had caused the commotion. She was sure that he did. However, she could not point that out. She could not risk shedding all the pretenses at this time. Yun Yanli turned his attention to Di Fui instead. Mr. D seemed at ease, even in such a dangerous moment. He did not see Di Fui helping Gu Shijio earlier. Di Fui confidently flicked his sleeves. "You're right. If I helped, I would not be able to witness your charm." Yun Yanli did not know what to answer. Soon, Di Fui and Gu Shijio returned to their carriage. Their reason for doing so was that Mr. D was obsessed with hygiene. He had just cleaned the wagon, so he was reluctant to switch. What frustrated Yun Yanli the most was Gu Zijia's unquestioned submission towards Di Fui's every request. When he asked to return, she willingly agreed and followed him back to the carriage without questioning his intentions. Yun Yanli was very annoyed but did not dare to act at this moment. The incident was finally over, and all the carriages continued their journey. Yun Yanli looked at the carriage before him and was puzzled. He did not summon the bloody bats. They appeared on their own. However, he knew about the characteristics of the bat. These bats were able to tell when an immense source of spiritual power appeared. They were attracted to spiritual power like flies are attracted to garbage, and could easily track the source within miles. He once used the bats to find sources of spiritual power, and they never let him down. The stronger the spiritual power, the more bats one could expect to be present. The scary part was that he had never seen so many bats going after one source of spiritual power before. Obviously, Gu Shijio and Di Fui possessed a strong source of spiritual power. They must have revealed some of their spiritual power by accident, thus attracting the bloody bats. Finally, the bats left as soon as they kept away their spiritual power. What was the source of the spiritual power that they had? Di Fui was the son of a celestial being and a devil. The divine couple clearly adored him, so they must have given him a lot of magical items. One of the items he was carrying must be the source of the spiritual power. That would explain how Di Fui was able to show up again after his disappearance for so long. He even had the ability to destroy the entire poisonous swamp that had encountered a catastrophe. Perhaps he had passed through some adventures and acquired an immense source of spiritual power. Di Fui was known to be a man of wicked plans, torturing his enemies with no mercy. Yun Yanli thought that it was all a plot. Otherwise, Di Fui would not stand aside even when his life was at stake. He would not leave Gu Shijio alone in such a situation. He appeared to be a little weak as well. Was Di Fui presenting a bold front to conceal something? Or was he only acting to lure Yun Yanli into action? A sudden realization occurred to Yun Yanli, which made him believe that he had a grasp of the entire situation. Yun Yanli was convinced that Di Fui revealed Yun Yanli's intentions to Gu Shijio, but she refused to believe his theory, so he wanted to make Yun Yanli launch the first attack to prove that he was right. Di Fui had pretended to be weak on purpose and flirted with Gu Shijio sweetly just to tempt Yun Yanli. Everything was a show just to trigger him to attack. Yun Yanli was not a man who would fall for such a trap. With a smug look on his face, Yun Yanli decided to enter Zhu Duking's carriage. He wanted to see if he could get any information from the man. The carriage that Di Fui and Gu Shijio rode was not badly damaged. There were some stains on the curtains and some holes every here and there, but overall, it looked fine. Di Fui changed the curtains into new ones that were even better than what Yun Yanli had for them earlier. He changed a few other items and threw the old ones out. Yun Yanli's men were not on the same carriage, but they could clearly see him from behind. All of them frowned with dissatisfaction by his action. Di Fui, how could you? They were very unhappy with Di Fui's actions and found him too arrogant. He was too disrespectful to the governor, the men thought. Yun Yanli came out of his carriage and saw exactly what Di Fui was doing. However, he was not quite bothered. With a smile, he proceeded to Zhu Duking's carriage as planned. His smile clearly showed that he would not fall for his trap. Di Fui could annoy him as much as he wanted, but he was not going to give him the chance to convince Gu Shijio. Yun Yanli's men looked at one another in consternation. If the governor was unbothered, perhaps they should not care about it too. Therefore, everyone pretended that they saw nothing. Gu Shijio looked at the carriage that had taken on an entirely new look. Di Fui had publicly removed every piece from Yun Yanli. It is not the time to trigger Yun Yanli. Are you sure that he will not be irritated by your little affectations? She was quite puzzled by Di Fui's intention. Di Fui let out a graceful smile as he explained confidently, "Don't worry. The more I behave so, the more unlikely he will attack. He must be thinking that I am doing all this to irritate him and trigger him to act out of exasperation, thus revealing his true self in front of you." Gu Shijio said nothing more. She knew that Di Fui was indeed a man with a plan. More accurately speaking, he was a child with a plan. She observed him and was relieved to see that his complexion had slowly returned. It seemed like the purple cloud mushrooms were useful after all. She then proceeded to read his pulse and could immediately tell that there was a strong flow of spiritual power circulating in his body. Delighted, she quickly put him down on the cushion and examined the open wound on his chest. The wound was starting to heal, and everything seemed to be going right. It was indeed a great sign. Relieved, she looked up and caught Di Fui gazing at her. There was a complicated look in his eyes as he stayed still and well-behaved. "Why are you looking at me like that?" She then helped him put his robes back on properly. Di Fui pulled her close and lay her down on his body. "I thought you were going to do something dirty to me." "You have overthought." She decided to offer him the entire bottle of purple cloud mushroom pills. "I can see that your complexion is slowly returning and that your wound is healing just fine, which proves that my pills are working. Would you like some more?" Di Fui planted a soft kiss on her forehead. "Do you have many of these pills?" He was perplexed by her generous offer. "Unfortunately, I don't. These pills are very precious. I have only encountered these purple cloud mushrooms once in my entire life and collected them all. I tried to find these mushrooms again, but my efforts were in vain." She had offered him the entire bottle without any hesitation. "Are you giving all of the pills to me?" "Yes." Gu Shijio did not hesitate. She always felt that these pills belonged to him. Giving him the bottle was only a gesture of returning something that was always meant to be his. Her kind offer touched Di Fui. He took a careful look at the content of the bottle. There were about 50 or 60 pills left. Each pill was encircled in a glistening layer of purple light that made it look as though it was glowing. Di Fui took about half of the bottle and returned the rest to Gu Shijio. "It will be a waste if I take them all. You should keep the rest. These pills will probably help you as well. When there is time, I will cover you while you slowly take these pills and meditate." Gu Shijio thought about his proposition before accepting the bottle. All right. She knew that she needed to restore her spiritual power as well. These pills would surely work for her. When she had regained her memory, she had thought about consuming the pill to restore her power. However, there was hardly any time for her to rest and meditate. Di Fui proceeded to swallow a dozen pills at once. Like before, these pills melted away in his stomach almost instantaneously. But this time, Di Fui could finally feel the warm sensation in his veins. It was a rather pleasant feeling. The wound on his chest did not hurt quite as much after the pills had dissolved in his stomach. Meanwhile, a warm stream of energy circulated his entire body, making him feel as if he had soaked his body in a hot spring. There were finally some apparent signs that Di Fui's condition was improving. Nevertheless, Gu Shijio saw him swallowing the pills yet still behaving as if nothing had happened. She was actually tempted to do the same. She took a pill and popped it into her mouth. She needed some water to help her swallow the pill, but as she searched for it, a man called out, "Oh no! There are so many bloody bats again. They have returned." Gu Shijio was surprised. In fact, she choked on the pill. Unable to breathe, she started coughing violently. The pill was not a small one, so she could not cough it out so easily. Soon her face was red. Di Fui quickly gave her a tap on the back, followed by a tight squeeze from the back. Finally, she spat the pill out, and it went through the curtains. Gu Shijio could finally catch her breath, and she kept away the bottle of pills in her storage bag again. It was a waste to let the pill fly out the window, so she wanted to try and get it back. However, what she saw next completely stunned her. There were thousands of bloody bats surrounding them in the air. They were initially drawn to the carriage, but they changed their course all of a sudden and plunged downward as if going after something important. Gu Shijio was dizzy just watching them fly together. What was going on? Gu Shijio threw the guardians a look and saw their equally perplexed faces. The bats were coming after us just now. Guardian Hua heaved a long sigh of relief. Anyway, I am glad that they are not going to attack us anymore. Guardian Jean agreed. I thought the same. If they were really coming at us, we would not be able to stand a chance. Do you know what they are doing? It seems as though they are killing themselves. The bloody bats were fighting frantically against one another all of a sudden. They were not even bothered by the carriages anymore. Gu Shijio was confused by the strange encounter. She stood there watching the bats for a while but could not figure out what they were doing. She somehow thought that it must have something to do with the pill that slipped out of her mouth. She turned her head around and turned to Di Fui for an answer. He was standing right next to her, with his arms around her waist. He was looking in the same direction, as if deep in thought. What do you think the bloody bats are doing? Gu Shijio finally asked. When he was around, she would always count on him for an answer. Di Fui did not say anything. Instead, he pulled her into the carriage and carefully instructed her, Shijio, these purple cloud mushroom pills should not be exposed anymore. The bats are actually drawn to the pills. We have wrongly faulted Yun Yanli for the earlier encounter with the bats. Gu Shijio had the same doubt but was not entirely sure. How can you be sure? Di Fui explained, I have seen everything with my eyes. They were plunging towards the pill. One of the bats seized the chance and swallowed the pill first, but was not able to handle the overwhelming effect. The first bat exploded, shattering its flesh into tiny bits. Meanwhile, the rest of the bats were frantically going after its meat, which sparked the fight. Gu Shijio was speechless. She never knew that the pills would actually attract the bloody bats. Perhaps, the pills were as precious as the meat of the Tang priest to them. Gu Shijio and Di Fui were engaged in a discussion when Guardian Jean suddenly asked, What is the matter, Governor Yun? Apparently, Yun Yanli was on board the carriage. As expected, Yun Yanli spoke nonchalantly, I have a few questions for your master. He raised the curtains and entered the carriage. Shijio, were you studying something? How did you manage to attract the huge mass of bloody bats? It is not a good sign. Take it out and let me have a look. Di Fui leaned against the table as he casually replied, You're hilarious. Why should we show it to you? Shouldn't you be ashamed of your sudden intrusion? Yun Yanli was speechless. He was not expecting Di Fui's brutal and straightforward reply. His expression clearly showed that he was a little offended. Prince Nianma, we are on the same team now. We have to work together to ensure our safety. The attacks from the bloody bats are getting more frequent now. Obviously, they are coming after one of your magical items. For our safety, it is better if you to show it to me so that we can examine it together, he said in an icy tone. How did you know they were coming after one of our magical items? Di Fui added. These bloody bats are attracted to powerful sources of spiritual power. They were clearly chasing after your carriage, so you must have been in possession of something valuable to them. Di Fui gave him a sharp look in the eyes as he said, I did not know that these bats would go after spiritual power. Using this information in relation to the blood rain, are you suggesting that the bats will attack the cities because they have their own sources of spiritual power as well? Yun Yanli's expression changed a little. He had obviously revealed a little too much information to Di Fui. Not many people knew about the characteristic of the bloody bats. Perhaps only him and Yun Qingluo. Even his closest follower knew nothing about the secret. It was rather unusual for him to have given away such a secret so carelessly. Was he being manipulated? Di Fui had the bloodline of the celestial beings and devils, so the kung fu that he possessed was a complicated mixture of both. He must have learned a method to manipulate his enemies into revealing their secrets. At least, that was what Yun Yanli believed. The man was very frustrated at that point. His fists were clenched tightly in his sleeves. Di Fui looked at him smilingly and said, Mr. Yun seems to know quite a number of things. What are the other characteristics of the bloody bats? I hope you do not mind to share the information with us, Mr. Yun. As you said before, our safety is the priority, so perhaps with the information, we can discuss our strategies to fight them later. Yun Yanli could no longer hold back his irritation. I asked my question first. Di Fui glanced at him as he continued, "Is it mandatory to answer your question first? Mr. Yun, as you said, we are on the same team now, so we should share everything we know and plan the next strike on our common enemy. Let us do it this way. You tell me about the secrets of the bloody bats, and I will share with you the magical item that attracted them. Although I will be the one who is giving up more than you, I am generous enough to share. I do not want to bother myself arguing with the likes of you." Yun Yanli clenched his fists repeatedly under his sleeves to vent her anger silently. He wanted to smash Di Fui's head right there and then. Overwhelmed, he put his fingers together to cast a spell, but an item that Di Fui held in his hands caught his attention. The man was holding a ring that was embellished with a gem that glistened with 7 colors. Di Fui was carving the gem with a finger. It used to be in the form of a hemisphere but was now carved into the shape of a rose using his nail. Every intricate detail of the petals was almost lifelike. Yun Yanli could recognize the material with a single glance. It was the toughest diamond that was ever discovered in the world. Yet, Di Fui was carving the diamond with his hand. Yun Yanli knew very well that he was not capable of doing the same. Therefore, he decided to hold back on the spell. The lack of patience in small matters would always upset great plans. He was not sure that he could kill Di Fui, so he should not act recklessly. There were still many opportunities ahead of them. In fact, Yun Yanli was going to host a grand dinner in the city to plot against his enemy. However, those were only his thoughts for the time being. He let out a smile to conceal his murderous thought. As far as I am concerned, these bloody bats are fond of blood and are very poisonous. They like to go after the powerful sources of spiritual power. The place where they gather is where the source of spiritual power lies. Does every city have a powerful source of spiritual power? Gu Shijio asked. Yun Yanli was more polite when he talked with Gu Shijio. It was evident from his reply, "It is indeed so. Shijio, the spiritual stones that we have collected from the various hunting exercises are the source that attracts the bats. The spiritual stones are the key to support the entire wizardry barrier that shelters the city." Shijio suddenly recalled the spiritual stones that she had stolen from Sueye City and nodded silently. She knew that Yun Yanli was not lying. However, there was still one question in her mind. If there are spiritual stones in the city, why don't the bloody bats attack every day? Why are they only coming once every 10 days? Is it a cycle for the spiritual stones to be exposed every 10 days? Are the stones otherwise sheltered by some wizardry barrier which prevents the bats from sensing their presence? Gu Zijia's questions were on point, and Yun Yanli could only let out a sigh after some thought. "It is more or less so. I cannot tell you more about it. Shijio, it is not that I do not trust you. This is the secret that every city bears. As a governor, I have vowed to keep the secret. I am sorry." Gu Shijio merely smiled at him after hearing his response. She wanted to see how long he could keep on pretending. She knew that he would personally appoint the governor of every city. Therefore, he must have dismissed the governor that he had appointed to take his position. But why would he trouble himself if everything was under control? Unfortunately, Gu Shijio was not able to extract much information from him. She would have to do her own research and find out more on her own. "All right, I have told you everything that I can. Shijio, shouldn't you hold your end of the deal and show me the source of your spiritual power?" Yun Yanli had not forgotten about their arrangement. In fact, Yun Yanli had not found out the identity of the culprit who stole his spiritual stones. He was somewhat convinced that Di Fui could be the thief. After all, the bloody bats would only attack if there were a large number of spiritual stones in the same area. Di Fui looked into his storage bag and took out a claw. He explained, "It is nothing much, really. We were having a meal. All that is left is this claw." The claw was the size of a little finger, so it was hard to tell what animal it came from. Yun Yanli was annoyed. "Prince Nyanma, are you trying to fool me? What kind of bird can provide such an immense source of spiritual power?" "The blue phoenix," Di Fui answered nonchalantly. Yun Yanli was speechless. He had never seen Blue Phoenix, but he had heard about it. He knew that it was one of the mythological beasts, but never knew that it was actually edible. Mythological beasts naturally possessed great spiritual power, but he was not sure if the claw really belonged to a mythological beast. Yun Yanli took the claw and tried to sniff it. He could already sense an extraordinary source of spiritual power in that brief moment. He was curious. Where did you get it from? Di Fui had a sip of tea before answering. This is your second question. Now, what have you prepared in exchange for the information? Yun Yanli did not know what to say. At least he knew the source of the spiritual power was not the spiritual stones. He decided to end the conversation and leave resentfully. Meanwhile, Gu Shijio was still studying the claw in the carriage. Is this really the claw of the Blue Phoenix? Di Fui nodded. He then took the claw and shattered it into pieces. He noticed that Gu Shijio had a confused look on her face. It is dirty, he explained. Gu Shijio shook her head in disapproval. Even a feather from this creature would be considered precious, let alone its claw that still bears spiritual power. It is a waste. Di Fui took out the remaining half he had of the creature and said, "There is more." Gu Shijio was delighted. "You should keep this for yourself. You are still weak. This will come in handy for your recovery." "You are complaining about me being weak," he teased smilingly. His smile had distracted Gu Shijio slightly, so she decided to change the topic. "You are doing quite well, aren't you? I saw that you were carving a diamond with your hand earlier." Di Fui pondered for a moment before putting the diamond on her palm. "You can do the same," he said. Gu Shijio examined the diamond, but could not find anything special about it. She then started to move her finger on the diamond, but could barely leave any mark on it. Perplexed, she looked at him for guidance. Di Fui gave her a delightful smile before applying a layer of cream on the diamond. After a while, he gave it back to her. "Try again." Gu Shijio tried again and managed to carve the diamond into the shape of a flower. Startled, she asked, "What cream did you apply? How does it soften the diamond?" "It is not actually a diamond, but a look-alike. Without the cream, it looks no different from a diamond. Once applied, the cream will completely unmask its true property." He continued, "I wanted to show it to you for fun, never knew that it would get us out of a problem." They continued their conversation while indulging in the meat of the Blue Phoenix. Gu Shijio insisted that Di Fui should have a more substantial portion of it, so he did. After that, Di Fui asked Gu Shijio to meditate, as he finally had the time to look after her. However, Gu Shijio thought that Di Fui should be the one to mediate first. He was, after all, the one with the injury. Di Fui had the meat before, and it did not trigger any reaction, so he did not see the need to meditate. However, he felt different this time. His body was boiling, and there was an apparent rush in his blood circulation. This was how a normal body would react upon consuming the meat of a mythological beast. The lack of reaction he had before must be due to the strong foundation of his spiritual power. The meat could hardly trigger any reaction because his spiritual power was already greater than what the bird had to offer. Now that his spiritual power had been greatly depleted, he could finally feel the power of the bird. Di Fui made some calculations and noticed that the meat would eventually increase his spiritual power by 1/10, which was quite remarkable progress. He took a look at Gu Shijio and noticed her crimson face. She needed to meditate. Without wasting any time, he pulled her closer and sat her down. "Listen to me, you should start first. I can meditate after you have fully absorbed the energy." Gu Shijio could not argue with him, so she did as told. The transfer of energy would take at most an hour. If the purple cloud mushroom could not trigger any reaction for Di Fui, then the half of the bird should be nothing to him. Moreover, he was the one who had the bird, so he should know the effects better than her. He was confident that he would be fine. Therefore, Gu Shijio proceeded to meditate. She did not meditate for long, however. About 20 minutes later, a sense of danger took over her mind. She started to panic as if something dangerous was about to unfold. Abruptly, she opened her eyes and realized that there was another man in the carriage. The man was not facing her, but she could immediately recognize him just by looking at his back. It was Yun Yanli. His palm was flashing with streaks of white light that were as sharp as a blade. He was about to give Di Fui a head-on strike. Di Fui was sitting there, helplessly. His veins seemed to be visible all over his body while his face was completely drenched in sweat. He locked his eyes on Yun Yanli, but could barely say anything. Before Yun Yanli could deal him a blow, Gu Shijio quickly interrupted, "What are you doing?" Yun Yanli froze and slowly turned his head around to face her. "Shijio, you are awake," he said with a tight smile. His smile could not hide the murderous look in his eyes. It was appalling. Gu Shijio acted as if she did not notice anything. She returned the smile and said, "Yes, I have finally absorbed all of the power from the meat. What are you doing here in our carriage? And what is wrong with Di Fui?" Yun Yanli paused before answering her concern. He must have gone overboard in his meditation. "I noticed that something was not right, so I came to check it out. I was about to help him just before you woke up." "Oh, I see," Gu Shijio answered without challenging him. She gave Yun Yanli a nod before approaching Di Fui to examine his pulse. There was an overflow of spiritual power in his body, like an unstoppable force that took over by storm. His vital signs indicated that he would be experiencing a significant change. He was obviously in pain, but he tried hard not to show it. Nonetheless, his physical state had revealed everything to Yun Yanli. His entire robe was soaked. Gu Shijio started to panic. She suspected that the purple cloud mushrooms must be the root cause. Perhaps he was experiencing a delayed reaction. "How is he doing?" Yun Yanli asked, seemingly concerned. "He is fine. He must have been too obsessed with his training. What he needs is a little recuperation. Mr. Yun, would you please leave us? I need to help him recover." Gu Shijio tried to stay calm so that Yun Yanli would not know the extent of the matter. However, Yun Yanli was not a man who could be easily persuaded. The look in his eyes had clearly shown his lack of trust in what Gu Shijio had told him, so he decided to sit right across Di Fui. "Shijio, I am very good at the healing injuries in muscles and veins. Let me help him." He then reached out to grab Di Fui's wrist. Yun Yanli possessed a good level of medical knowledge, so he wanted to find out what was wrong with Di Fui himself. However, before Yun Yanli could even reach Di Fui's hand, he was immediately pushed away by a seven-colored ray. The force was so great that anyone with insufficient spiritual power would have been swept out of the carriage. As for Yun Yanli, he could not help but tremble a little under the force. He felt as if his palm had been electrified. A tingling sensation still lingered in his hand even though the light had dissipated. Utterly irritated, he exclaimed, "What are you doing? I was just trying to help." Di Fui's face was still as pale as a sheet. There were droplets of sweat all over his forehead. However, his expression remained stern as he sat with his legs crossed like a Buddha's statue. He looked away and said unrelentingly, "Get out." "Mr. Yun, I would suggest that you leave," Gu Shijio chimed in. Yun Yanli noticed their inhospitable nature, so he agreed. "All right, I will be outside. Call me if you need me." He then pushed the curtains aside and left the carriage. As soon as he walked out, Di Fui collapsed straight into Gu Zijia's arms. Gu Shijio held him up and realized that his hands were freezing yet sweaty. "Let's leave this place." Gu Shijio could not play this game of charades any longer. It was too much of a risk due to Di Fui's condition. "No, not now," Di Fui exclaimed. Yun Yanli must have set up a wizardry barrier that can prevent you from teleporting. If they tried to escape from the carriage, Yun Yanli would definitely be alarmed. He had his men all over the place and was personally very skilled in kung fu. They would not be able to run far before getting caught. The situation would be worse by then. Gu Shijio heaved a helpless sigh. "What should we do?" She then quickly took his wrist and said, "Let me help you." "It is too late." Di Fui's breaths hastened. Given his vast medical knowledge, he knew very well that his conditions would not get any better in a short period of time. Instead of getting her to treat him, he passed her a flute. "Do you know how to play the song, The 9 Songs in the Sky?" The 9 Songs in the Sky was one of the modern songs with a traditional composition that she had heard about before. She was familiar with the tune. Yes, she replied with a firm nod. Di Fui was relieved. If you play the tune outside, help will come to us. She did not know that he had another way of escaping. She was somewhat relieved to learn that he had something planned. Di Fui proceeded to swallow another pill. What are you doing? Gu Shijio quickly asked. This pill will help to calm the blood in my veins. Gu Shijio never knew that such a pill existed. She was certainly very concerned as this was her first time to have come across the pill. Is there any side effect? The pill will only temporarily suppress all of the symptoms for an hour. When the symptoms returned an hour later, his condition would undoubtedly worsen, but Di Fui decided to keep the truth from her. If there were any other way, Di Fui would choose not to take the pill. In the long run, it would do more harm than good to his body, but it was the only choice he could make right now. Yun Yanli had become suspicious, and Di Fui believed that he would attack any time soon. Gu Shijio walked to the outside and saw Yun Yanli right outside her cabin. He stood tall with his hands behind him. His eyes were locked on the horizon, seemingly at ease, but Gu Shijio could still feel his aura that spelled Di Fui's death. He turned around as soon as he heard some movement and was astonished. Are you done treating him? That was fast. Gu Shijio nodded as she put the flute into her mouth. Let me have a look at him. Yun Yanli turned around and was ready to enter. Gu Shijio pointed the flute at his chest to stop him. That is unnecessary. What he needs is a quiet rest. He asked for no disturbance. Yun Yanli could tell how serious she was at that moment. He smiled. All right, as you wish. His attention was then drawn to the flute in her hand. Do you know how to play the flute? A bit. Gu Shijio then tried to test the sound of the flute. If it were not for Mr. Fui, I would have asked you to play a song. It is fine. The sound of the flute is rather calming. A nice song can help him focus even better. Gu Shijio then put the flute in position and was ready to play. Wait. Yun Yanli stretched out his hand in an attempt to put away her flute. Quickly, Gu Shijio took a step back to avoid his hand. What is the matter? Smilingly, Yun Yanli offered her another flute. The flute is produced from the bamboo garden of Xiang Concubine. It would certainly produce a more melodious tune than the one in your hand. Gu Shijio did not take it. Are you saying that my flute is not good enough? She asked with a tight smile. Yun Yanli chuckled as he answered casually, that is not what I meant. I appreciate the celestial beauty in all the songs that you are going to play. A normal flute, however, will not do your talent justice. Gu Shijio giggled. She studied the flute in her hand and agreed that it certainly did not look spectacular. The flute was made from a regular bamboo trunk and even had a small lump on it. However, since Di Fui had requested her to play that particular flute, it must mean something. Hence, she would not accept any proposal to change the flute. I prefer a flute that preserves more originality in its creation. She kindly rejected his offer. She turned the flute around but did not hold it firmly. All of a sudden, it slipped and started to fall. Yun Yanli quickly reached out to grab the falling flute in time. You have to be more careful, Yun Yanli complained. Swiftly, he examined the flute thoroughly and found nothing abnormal about it. He was finally relieved and returned the flute to her. Shijio, what song would you like to play? Perhaps I can join in. Gu Shijio wiped the flute and said, The 9 Songs in the Sky. Yun Yanli paused. He had never heard of that song before. All right, you go on then. I shall be your audience for this song. Deep down, Gu Shijio wanted to sneer at him. Also, she knew that he did not have a clue about what she was up to since there was nothing odd about the flute, at least by the looks of it. She, too, had examined it before coming out of the cabin. Chapter 2444, The Strongest Backup. 3. She had dropped the flute on purpose earlier so that Yun Yanli had the chance to observe the flute and lower his guard. Upon playing the flute, the melodious tune filled the air. Gu Shijio was a talented musician. She could sing very well and play an array of instruments. Although she could not play the flute as well as Di Fui, it was still very pleasing to hear. Yun Yanli could not keep his intense gaze away from her. She looked extremely beautiful with her long hair dancing in the breeze. It was such a surreal sight that Yun Yanli could not believe his eyes. A sudden, painful realization came to Yun Yanli. He had fallen for her. In fact, he wanted her very badly. Although she had a very low profile, she always stood out wherever she went. Furthermore, her kung fu was so powerful that no one could disrespect her. He thought that he was the perfect match for her when he was still a prince back in heaven, so he decided to stay by her side and fulfill her every wish. Secretly, he hoped that his actions would touch her heart one day. It was completely beyond his expectation that his world would change so radically. He had lost his status and even become a wanted man. However, Gu Shijio seemed to still enjoy his company and even saved his life. He clearly liked her very much, but the feeling was never mutual. Although Yun Yanli could be very evil, he would never do anything to hurt Gu Shijio. Although women were known to do illogical things when they were in love, Yun Yanli was just the same. Whenever Gu Shijio was around, he was always tensed. He would have to try to mask his anxiety from her and always found himself struggling to impress her. He was certain that the only way he could keep her around was by force. Due to Di Fuya's current condition, perhaps today was the best shot that he had to kill the mighty being. He knew what he needed to do, but as soon as she approached him, he immediately lost all courage and became overcautious about his decision. He could not believe that Gu Shijio would prefer a child over him. She used to be obsessed with a dead man. Now, she had obviously changed her mind and shared her affection with another man. Many thoughts bombarded his uneasy mind that kept fueling his fury. His fists were ready to fight, but he still could not find the courage. The song had finally come to an end, but the enchanting notes were still lingering in the air. "That was a great one," Yun Yanli exclaimed with a tone of admiration. Then he immediately changed the topic. "Shijio, aren't you going to look for Huang Tu anymore?" There was no doubt in her mind that she should not tell him that Di Fui was actually Huang Tuesday. Hence, she gave a rather equivocal reply, "I shall pursue that search again if fate brings me back on that path." In fact, Di Fui and Huang Tu were one and the same. The main difference was their memories. She had forgotten about the past too, so his lack of memory about their past did not make any difference to her. She was in love with the man, and that was enough. Yun Yanli was smart, but he grasped a different meaning from Gu Zijia's intended message. He thought that she had already found herself a new sweetheart, so Huang Tu no longer meant anything to her. "Oh, I see. Shijio, I did not know that you would fall in love with someone else." His fingers then moved in a planned motion and were ready to cast a spell. He was finally determined to launch his first strike and would do so when Gu Shijio was least prepared. All of a sudden, a voice came from afar. "Nyanma, are you there?" Shocked, Yun Yanli immediately looked up and was perplexed. Chapter 2445. The Strongest Backup. 4. A man in a snowsuit approached them from a distance. He looked tall and graceful, with a mask that covered his entire face. Only his enchanting eyes were noticeable. He stood on the back of a majestic horse that had its wings extended in the sky. The man's white robes fluttered in the wind, almost blending in with the mass of white clouds behind him. There was a wheel-like, lotus throne embroidery shining brilliantly with auspicious streaks of light on his robes. Naturally, he possessed an aura only a god would be able to obtain. He was the Divine Lord. Although his face was covered, his signature white robes had already revealed his identity. Many people chose to dress in white, but the white robes that Shinjioli possessed could not be easily replicated. The robes were made from the best quality silk found only in heaven. The hidden embroidery of the lotus throne was a secret mastery. No embroiderer in the mortal world could ever reproduce the same masterpiece. Yun Yanli had only seen the Divine Lord once from afar back in heaven, but the mighty man had certainly made quite an impression on him. Therefore, Yun Yanli was able to tell who he was as soon as the man approached. Panicked, he gasped in astonishment. The man and his wife were the ones responsible for the fall of his family, so what Yun Yanli felt for the man was an absolute resentment. However, he still trembled at the sight of the Divine Lord. The man was the leading figure of all the three worlds. His power was unfathomable. Although the Divine Lord had clearly toned down lately, Yun Yanli was still intimidated by him. He dared not act recklessly anymore. The Divine Lord had never truly cared about anyone else, except for his family. He took a look at the flute in Gu Zijia's hand and was impressed. "Were you the one who played the flute?" His icy tone lingered in the air. Gu Shijio cupped her hands submissively and said, "Yes, it was I." The Divine Lord took another look at the flute again. "Where is Nianma?" Obviously, he could recognize the flute. Gu Shijio knew that the sole intention of the song was to call for help. What she could not figure out was who could possibly intimidate Yun Yanli. She was just as startled as she did not expect the mighty man to show up. Before she could say anything, she noticed that the curtains behind her were flipped. Di Fui walked out bowed. "Father, I did not expect to see you here in the Shura world." As soon as Shinjoli saw his son, the icy atmosphere was quickly replaced by a hint of warmth. "I am here to see you. You do not look like you have done very well here," he softly said. The man seemed to rejoice in his son's discomfiture. It was how they usually interacted. Di Fui rubbed his forehead in embarrassment. "Father." Shinjoli turned his eyes to Yun Yanli and said nothing. The stern look was enough to make Yun Yanli's flesh crawl. No matter how much Yun Yanli hated the man, it was not the right time to show his resentment. "Pleasure to see you, my lord," he bowed. All of his men proceeded to bow as well. Shinjoli only nodded at them. He then turned his attention back to Di Fui. "Nianma, you do not look very well. Come with me. Let's get you back to the pink of health." Shinjoli was not a keen talker. He did not even bother to exchange courtesies with people. He raised his hand and summoned a carriage that was furnished with an elegant palette of blue. The carriage looked simple from afar, but the details were very elegant. The graceful and stylish appearance clearly suited a powerful man like Shinjoli. Obviously, he was going to take his son with him. Di Fui naturally would not object to his father's invitation. He offered Gu Shijio his hand and said, "Shijio, let us go." Chapter 2446, The Strongest Backup, 5. It was a rather cloudy day. From a distance, the setting sun was already at the edge of the horizon. The carriage swept through the clouds, along with two of Di Fui's men. Yun Yanli was still kneeling in front of his carriage and watched helplessly as the carriage went into the distance. There was not a word that he could say to stop the carriage. It was a golden chance that he had unfortunately missed. His indecisive manner had cost him dearly this time. Everything that happened was not part of Yun Yanli's plan. He was still stunned by what had happened and was not able to calm his mind. He knew that Shinjili was once in the Shura world many years ago. But what was the man doing here now? He started to panic as he believed that the Divine Lord would soon find out about all the mess that he had caused in the Shura world. All of his work over the past centuries could be ruined at once. His palms were cold and sweaty as he clenched his fists tightly in frustration. "Why did you stop?" Zhu Duqing had yet to realize what happened. He came out from his carriage, seemingly half asleep. He looked at the sky in utter confusion and asked, "How far are we from Ligua City?" "The sun is about to set." Yun Yanli looked annoyed at him. He was not quite fond of Mr. Zhu, apparently. He initiated some small talk with Mr. Zhu in hopes of getting some information out of the man, but Mr. Zhu quietly disregarded his presence. "Stupid!" Yun Yanli was certainly irritated. "They have just left. Do you still want to come with me to Ligua City?" Yun Yanli was starting to get impolite with his guest. Zhu Duqing was not expecting the answer he received. "What? Have they left? When did that happen? Why didn't anyone tell me about it?" He sounded like a puppy who had just been abandoned. Yun Yanli obviously took joy in his misfortune. "Why should they tell you? Who are you to them?" he teased. Zhu Duqing casually fanned himself as he added, "Shijio is my master. It is the closest that anyone can get to her. They did not take me when they left, but they took Guardian Jin and Guardian Hua with them. They must be out of their minds. This is unacceptable. Who took them away? Why did they leave so suddenly? Didn't you say that you were inviting us to Lagua City? Why did you let them go so suddenly? He bombarded Yun Yanli with a series of questions, but Yun Yanli only managed to get the last few questions and answered him with a tone of sarcasm. Mr. Fuya's father was here and took them away. Do you think I could stop them? He could not even make a sound. Astonished, Zhu Duqing finally stopped playing with his fan. His father? The Divine Lord came with his wife? Yun Yanli gave him a sibilant sound of disapproval. Only the Divine Lord came. His wife was not here. Zhu Duqing was curious. That is strange. They are always together. Why did they come separately this time? Yun Yanli was shocked too. He knew that the Divine Lord would never be away from his wife, so he too was surprised by his wife's absence. Perhaps his wife is occupied. They can certainly be apart, occasionally, Yun Yanli murmured in uncertainty. Zhu Duqing did not comment any further. He gave the donkey a tap on the buttock and said, "Let's go." The donkey, as always, disapproved of the gesture. It whipped its tail at Zhu Duqing's face before launching itself into the distance at full speed. Yun Yanli was speechless. "Master, are you going to let him go just like that?" One of his men did not feel that it was a wise decision. Yun Yanli was a little distracted. What can he do for me if I make him stay? He is the man who can produce the devil-quenching clothing. Master, didn't you plan on getting him on board as one of us? Your plan to conquer the Devil Kingdom relies greatly on him. Yun Yanli finally recovered from his preoccupation. Indeed, he had always wanted to convince Mr. Zhu to join him, but the man had barely even left the Devil Kingdom. Also, it was not always easy to find him, as he was clearly a very sneaky man. It was probably even more difficult to convince him to make the devil-quenching clothing. How could Yun Yanli forget such an important thing? Go after him at full speed. Get him back for me. On second thought, I shall go after him myself. Yun Yanli leaped forward at full speed. Out of the entire continent in the Shura world, perhaps, it was only the Devil Kingdom that was blessed with many inhabitants. Once it was conquered, he could place another array formation there to absorb the spiritual power for himself. Only then could his kung fu be greatly improved to be on a par with Shinjoli and his wife. Therefore, the devil-quenching clothing was essential to conquering the Devil Kingdom, without which he would have no chance. If Yun Yanli were to enter the Devil Kingdom without the appropriate attire, he would probably be able to survive for some time. Nonetheless, as for his people, as soon as they stepped into the land, they would immediately turn into piles of ash. Determined, Yun Yanli used all of his strength to go after Zhu Duqing, who had just left the place 2 minutes ago. He was possibly traveling faster than the speed of light. Coupled with his good tracking skills, Yun Yanli believed that he would be able to find him in less than a minute. To his disappointment, the man was nowhere to be found. In that brief moment, Zhu Duqing had already disappeared, along with his visible donkey carriage. Yun Yanli could not believe it. The carriage was only led by a donkey with an attitude problem. Even a dragon would not be able to travel so fast. It was as if the man had disappeared into thin air. Frustrated, Yun Yanli could not help but clench his fists. Had Mr. Zhu figured out that Yun Yanli would be going after him? Had he escaped through a portal? Zhu Duqing was indeed a cunning man, Yun Yanli thought to himself. Nonetheless, he clearly recalled that Mr. Zhu was too weak to be able to open the portal. He even refused Gu Zijia's request to open it and would rather take the carriage with the donkey. How did he become so powerful all of a sudden? Was he only pretending to be weak? Furthermore, Yun Yanli had not expected a man like Zhu Duqing to acknowledge Gu Shijio as his master. It was certainly confusing. Just at that moment, another question arose. Zhu Duqing had spent many years in the Devil Kingdom without making any appearances outside. Now that he had acknowledged Gu Shijio as his master, that would mean that Gu Shijio had stepped foot into the Devil Kingdom before and made her first encounter with Zhu Duqing. Gu Shijio would not be able to make it into the Devil Kingdom without the devil-quenching clothing. The sudden realization left him dumbstruck. He suddenly remembered the theft in Governor Yes' residence. Other than the spiritual stones, A rare set of devil-quenching clothing went missing as well. Could she be the thief? Was the thief not someone from the Devil Kingdom? Yun Yanli's suspicion grew stronger, but he also found it hard to believe. If she really were the one who conducted the theft, she must have found out about his plan. Was she only acting in front of him? Was she worried that he might harm her? Utterly shocked, he continued to connect the dots. He then thought about the two guardians, Jean and Hua. These names sounded quite familiar to him. He finally recalled. The new Devil King had two courtiers, who also shared the same surnames, Jean and Hua. Had Di Fui become the new Devil King during the time he had disappeared? It could not be. How could he achieve such a great title in such a brief moment? Nonetheless, it was Di Fui who they were talking about. The man's presence was already a miracle. As the son of the celestial being and a demon, he had always been full of surprises since young. He possessed the mentality of a well-grown man, even at a tender age. Moreover, he was equipped with many magical items supplied to him by his parents. He could do the impossible. Yun Yanli finally had the chance to catch Di Fui while he was at his weakest, but the Divine Lord's sudden interference had snatched his opportunity away to end the man. But how did the Divine Lord manage to show up in time? The Divine Lord had claimed that he was intrigued by the sound of the lute. Did the lute belong to Di Fui? Was the melody played by Gu Shijio a way for Di Fui to communicate with the Divine Lord? Did he make Gu Shijio play the melody? If he had known about the Divine Lord's whereabouts any earlier, why didn't he play the melody earlier? Also, since the Divine Lord had never acted without his wife, why didn't they come together this time? Many doubts surfaced, but Yun Yanli was very much convinced by one of his speculations. Could the Divine Lord be an impostor? Was it only an escape plan for Di Fui? As soon as he thought of it, he trembled. He tried to link more facts together and recalled that Di Fui was a man with many connections. Among them all, there was a man who could actually imitate anyone. I need my men. His tone changed completely. Gu Shijio looked at the man standing courteously in the corner, who was still bearing the appearance of Shinjoli. She could not quite believe her eyes. The man was only an imitation of the Divine Lord. Di Fui had asked his man to play the role of his own father. It was done so skillfully to the point where he was indistinguishable from the original person. He even managed to deceive her. She then looked at Di Fui and said, I can finally understand your escape plan. Di Fui's face was still pale as a sheet, but he answered her with a smile, I had no other way. The enemy is obviously deceitful. Preparedness averts peril. He knew that Yun Yanli was not a local and that his kung fu was much more advanced, so he had already planned out an escape plan as soon as he left the Devil Kingdom. If he really ran into Yun Yanli, he would use the imitation to get to safety. He wanted to wait until they were in Ligua City to find out more about Yun Yanli's background and what kind of plan he was up to before escaping. Never had he expected that he would have overdosed on the purple mushroom pill and that he would almost lose himself. Gu Shijio took a walk around the fake Shinjoli. She found it hard to believe that his temperament was almost the same as the Divine Lord's as well. There was only a slight difference between this impersonator and the actual man. Perhaps only the Divine Lord's closest men could distinguish the two. Yun Yanli had only seen the Divine Lord a few times, so he certainly could not tell him apart. In addition, the Divine Lord had been in the Shuro world before, so it was not terribly unusual for him to visit again. Yun Yanli would certainly have believed the show. Get us back to the Devil Kingdom as soon as possible. Di Fui made his order. Yes. Guardian Jean answered promptly and continued the journey. Gu Shijio looked at Di Fui again. Preparedness averts peril, Di Fui calmly said. Gu Shijio heaved a sigh of relief before turning away to have a look out the window. Are you troubled by Zhu Duqing? Are you blaming me for not calling him along? Di Fui asked. Hesitantly, she said, I certainly am thinking of him. However, this is not your fault. Everyone knows that the Divine Lord is not keen on the trivial. Chapter 2449. What should she do? The Divine Lord is also not fond of outsiders. Even though you used an impersonator, He needs to behave like the actual Divine Lord to prevent Yun Yanli from getting suspicious. Also, Yun Yanli's biggest interest is to kill you, so we will both be his main focus. He has yet to unravel the fact that we know about his plan, so he will not put Zhu Duqing in any difficult situation because he still needs him around for our future encounter. Moreover, Zhu Duqing is a great man who is capable of making the devil-quenching clothing. Yun Yanli will only try to convince him to join his army, so he should be safe. Di Fui gazed at her intensely with a sense of admiration. He did not wish for any misunderstanding, so he was prepared to explain everything to her. Impressively, she already fully understood the matter. He pulled her into his arms and said, "Baby, your intelligence is unparalleled." He then planted a soft kiss on her forehead. Gu Shijio was stunned by his action, while Guardian Hua immediately walked away to give them space. Meanwhile, with an awkward cough, the man who played Shinjioli also left the scene. Gu Shijio suddenly felt concerned about something. Ask him to remove his disguise. Otherwise, it would alert outsiders if they saw the Divine Lord leading a carriage. Things would become suspicious. The smallest mistake could easily ruin any plans they had. They had to be careful not to leave any trace behind. There is no need. The real danger has yet to pass. He should keep the appearance in case something were to surface. Besides, he can turn invisible. She finally grasped the situation. You really have the best men with the most unique capabilities at your disposal. Di Fui only smiled at her. He was born with a gift of being resourceful. He had every man he needed to execute his plans when required. He then kissed Gu Shijio softly on her lips. Shijio, I want you to have the most secure life and stop wandering from one place to another all the time. Gu Shijio was happy to hear that, but her main concern at this time was his injury. How do you feel? She took a closer look at him and also started reading his pulse. His pulse seemed steady and normal. However, Di Fui told her that the symptoms would come back in about half an hour. Let me help you clear your circulation. Once it is unblocked and free-flowing, it will have a higher level of tolerance. When the spiritual power in your body starts going haywire again, the pain will not be as bad. Gu Shijio grabbed his hand and started treating his condition with a steady flow of her spiritual power. To her surprise, as soon as she started channeling her spiritual power to Di Fui, it bounced back at her with an even greater force directed by his body. Unprepared by the sudden rebound, she trembled a little due to the impact and shed some blood from her nose. She quickly channeled the spiritual power back to her body and looked at Di Fui in utter astonishment. There seemed to be a greater force that restricted the flow of her spiritual power into his body. Determined, she was not ready to give in and continued to examine his pulse. Everything seemed normal. However, she knew that there must be a stronger force that was hidden beneath the surface of his seemingly normal appearance. What if it had yet to unleash itself? What should she do? Gu Shijio tried to recall everything that she knew to see if there was any cure. Nevertheless, she had never encountered such a situation. She quickly alarmed the firmament stone and told it about Di Fui's situation. The firmament stone remained quiet for some time. Gu Shijio thought it was still asleep. Nonsense! It suddenly exclaimed. Gu Shijio was stunned by its response. The purple cloud mushroom comes with an immense supply of spiritual power. It will take days to digest one mushroom, and yet you have fed him at least a dozen at once. Did you really think that it is only a supplement? A fool's haste brings about no additional speed. He is only a golden immortal, spiritually and physically, which is not even close to the level of a mighty immortal. You have fed him with at least half the power of a mighty immortal. Di Fui's situation could be compared to a stream that overflowed because it was filled with the contents of an ocean. The force would definitely crush the small, narrow river and cause permanent damage. Gu Shijio assessed the severity of the situation. Half the power of a mighty immortal? Are you suggesting that the purple cloud mushrooms contain the power of a mighty immortal? Did they come from the spiritual power of a deceased mighty immortal? She bombarded the firmament stone with a series of questions. A thought suddenly hit her. When Huang Tu was immortalized, Did all of his spiritual power get converted into these purple cloud mushrooms? The firmament stone was speechless. It regretted giving out too much information and started to worry about the possible catastrophe that awaited it for breaching the secret. Gu Shijio was simply too smart. She could infer a lot of information based on a simple conversation. The firmament stone only replied to her with a set of ellipses. She immediately understood. The firmament stone had its own temperament. When Gu Shijio said something wrong, it would undoubtedly correct her. But when she was right about something which it was not allowed to tell her, it would show her a set of dots. She never knew that the purple cloud mushrooms were Huang Tu's spiritual power in the past. No wonder she could only pick these mushrooms once. She also did not know that Huang Tu had the spiritual power of a mighty immortal while he was alive. If Di Fui was his reincarnation, it should not be too difficult for him to absorb the power, right? Yet, perhaps they would have had different physiques. When Di Fui first consumed the purple cloud mushroom, there was no sign of any rejection by his body whatsoever. Was it because the mushrooms used to be his own power? Supposing that were true, if he continued to consume the mushrooms one by one, he would probably regain his power to the level of a mighty immortal, or even a great deity, in no time. Perhaps his main mistake was to have taken almost half of the mushrooms all at once. It was hard to predict what would happen to him next. Little Tsang, do you have any idea how to solve this? No idea. The firmament stone paused and became somewhat dejected as it continued, only he can help himself. Panicked, she took a deep breath to calm herself down. She took a look at Di Fui, who was quietly meditating. She suddenly felt guilty for letting him consume so many pills. I am the one to blame. Master, this misfortune might be a blessing in disguise. This is perhaps a challenge that he has to overcome. He will be fine once he makes it through, the firmament stone reassured. What if he does not make it through? In that case, he will need a new body. Don't worry, Master. All it takes is another 20 years before he becomes a man again. Gu Shijio did not know what to say. She felt even more anxious after the firmament stone's reassurance. Di Fui, who had been sitting quietly at the side, suddenly added, Shijio, rest assured that if I really need to change to a new body, I will certainly take the firmament stone along. It knows about so many things, so it will definitely be helpful. The firmament stone was astonished by Di Fui's suggestion. Was he planning to take it to the grave with him? What had it done to deserve this? No way. My master is Gu Shijio. I shall never switch. The firmament stone fought for itself. Di Fui looked at it calmly. Shijio cares about me. In order for me to return as soon as possible, she will definitely send you with me to the dead. Don't worry. I will make sure that you will not suffer much loss. However, I do not like bracelets. Perhaps I will turn you into a jade that can be embellished on my sword so that you can fight my battles with me. The firmament stone was utterly shocked by Di Fui's suggestion. It liked to be a bracelet and had certainly not imagined itself as an embellishment on a weapon. It could easily lose its life. Indignant at the injustice, it turned to Gu Shijio for help. Master, what do you have to say? Gu Shijio only sighed. Little Tsang, if he really needs you, I will make anything possible for him. I want him to return to me as soon as he can. In other words, she was willing to sacrifice the firmament stone. Master, this is a typical example of a bad friend who places a relationship over a friendship. You must not throw me away simply because of a man. Little Tsang, I know you have many solutions. If you can come up with a plan, your sacrifice will no longer be needed, Gu Shijio persuaded. She could tell that the firmament stone was hiding something from them. Therefore, she joined hands with Di Fui to stress it out. The firmament stone was certainly dumbstruck. Helplessly, it finally surrendered. Let me think about it. In the end, the firmament stone finally offered a solution. The firmament stone attached itself to Di Fui's wrist so that when the seizure happened again, it would use its power to absorb the exploding flow of energy in his body. The firmament stone naturally possessed some mysterious power that could probably help Di Fui get through this great obstacle. However, there were limitations to its power as well. In case of overabsorption, It would have to risk being exploded and end up as a pile of ash. It could only help as much as possible but explained to them all the possible outcomes. Guiltily, Gu Shijio gave the firmament stone a gentle tap and said, "Little Tsang, try your best. Do not force yourself too much." All of a sudden an idea came to her. "Is it possible for you to direct part of his power to me? I was once a mighty immortal, after all. My power is temporarily lost, but my physique remains as that of a mighty immortal, so I should be able to keep some of the spiritual power, right?" Little Tsang was suddenly hopeful. "I can try. It could probably work." As soon as the discussion ended, the carriage came to an abrupt stop. Gu Shijio was unprepared for the sudden break and lunged directly towards Di Fui. Since Di Fui had not secured himself, he fell when Gu Shijio crashed into his arms. Luckily, the carriage was lined with thick carpets, so they did not have a bad fall. "Who is that?" Guardian Jean demanded sternly. "It is I," a man answered in an icy tone. His voice sent chills down Gu Shijio's spine as soon as she heard him. It was Yun Yanli. He was finally here. Had he found out something? Hesitantly, she wanted to go out and face him but was immediately stopped by Di Fui. "Don't go out there just yet. Let us listen to him first," he said in a directed audio. Guardian Jean sounded neither aggressive nor friendly, so it was difficult to assess the situation. "Governor Yun, what is the matter? You should not simply stop the carriage of the Divine Lord. If he is unhappy about it, you will be severely punished for the disrespectful gesture." There was a look of uncertainty in Yun Yanli's eyes. After all, he did not have any proof of his speculations. After a short pause, he continued very politely, "I would not simply stop the carriage of the Divine Lord if I did not have any emergency that would require his help. The Divine Lord is treating the injury of Prince Nianma and has absolutely no time for you. You should go back now. When the Divine Lord is free, you can come back and ask for his help." Guardian Hua tried to chase him away. Yun Yanli would not take the rejection for an answer, so he answered apologetically, "The matter of urgency is related to Prince Nianmo's injury, so there is no time to spare. I sincerely request the Divine Lord's presence. If he has no time for me right now, I can follow the carriage first and wait until he is free to see me." Chapter 2452. The Escape. The Divine Lord's voice could be heard from inside the cabin. "What is the matter? Just voice your concern from outside the cabin." Yun Yanli said hesitantly, "The matter is confidential. I shall tell you face to face later. I can wait." The Divine Lord sounded disinterested. "As you wish." Yun Yanli bowed at the response. He seemed polite, but he was actually just acting in order to assess the situation. The cabin was not entirely soundproof, so he could hear what was actually happening behind closed doors. "My lord, let me go outside and have a look. Yun Yanli is a friend. If he is here, he may have something urgent to tell us. Perhaps he can share it with me," Gu Shijio requested. "Stay put," the Divine Lord answered briefly. "Shijio, if he is your friend, he can wait. Let me lean against your shoulder for a while." Di Fui sounded relaxed and unconcerned as usual. Yun Yanli was astonished. He started to question his earlier judgment. There seemed to be nothing abnormal from their conversation. Was he overthinking the situation? In fact, he was afraid of the Divine Lord, so before he found out more about who he was dealing with, it would be wise that he did not act impulsively. Thus he waited. Guardians Jean and Hua finally had time to tidy themselves up. They looked completely different from the time where they had just escaped from the trap in the poisonous swamp. The two men actually looked quite smart. Yun Yanli had never met the men before, so he was unsure if they were really the courtiers from the Devil Kingdom. With a smile, he tried to start a conversation. "Both of you certainly dashing. You had looked so shabby earlier." Guardian Jean interrupted him with a hiss as he said hoarsely, "The Divine Lord prefers tranquility. Stay silent." Yun Yanli was speechless. It seemed that he did not even have the chance to get more information from the men. However, now was not the time to start a brawl. With a smile, he continued to remain quiet. With a flick of his finger, a flash of white light emerged and rose into the air all of a sudden. Guardian Jean was puzzled. What are you doing? Yun Yanli answered assuredly, I have to summon my men for protection. The Divine Lord is helping Prince Nianma with his injury, so there should not be any external disruption at all. I can see that it is getting late. The Blood Rain and Bloody Bats will arrive any time now. My men can build a small wizardry barrier to keep this cabin safe. In actuality, he could not recognize Guardians Jean and Hua, but his men could. The flash of white light was genuinely a call to summon his men, but his intention was different from what he had informed the two gentlemen. Guardian Jean was unimpressed. Why should the Divine Lord require your men's assistance to keep the cabin safe? There is no need. Yun Yanli's smile never faded. Don't worry. My men will only secure the perimeter, they should not cause any problems. The Divine Lord rarely visits, so I must take this chance to show my hospitality. Hospitality? What makes you think that the Shura world is your territory? Who do you think you are? Guardian Jean questioned his position. Casually, Yun Yanli fanned himself while gesturing Guardian Jean to keep quiet. The Divine Lord prefers tranquility. Stay silent. Guardians Jean and Hua stared at one another with their mouth agape, not knowing what to say. Before they could come up with a response, Gu Shijio suddenly emerged. What are you arguing about? The Guardians immediately bowed to her out of respect. Miss Gu. Yun Yanli was ready to perform a spell, but Gu Zijia's presence changed his mind. He put his fingers down and said politely, Shijio, how is Prince Nianma doing? Fine. Yanli, the Divine Lord will see you later, please be patient. Gu Shijio looked calm as she spoke to him. She then gave Guardians Jean and Hua a wave and said, Both of you, come in here. The Divine Lord has something to tell you. Chapter 2453, The Escape, 2. The two guardians acknowledged her statement and went away promptly. Hence, only Gu Shijio and Yun Yanli were outside the cabin. Yun Yanli was quite relieved to have Gu Shijio with him. Although he was not certain if the actual Divine Lord was here in the Shura world, he was sure that Di Fui would not leave Gu Shijio behind. As the Divine Lord preferred tranquility, Yun Yanli did not strike up a conversation. Nonetheless, Gu Shijio did ask him about Zhu Duqing whereabouts, so Yun Yanli told her exactly what she wanted to know. The man had already left without telling him where he was going. Intensely, Yun Yanli gazed at Gu Shijio. There was still a matter that had left him perplexed. Shijio, has Mr. Zhu really acknowledged you as his master? Gu Shijio answered briefly, yes. In that case, you must have been to the Devil Kingdom, right? That must be why you were out of touch with me for quite some time. I was worried about you. Yun Yanli looked at her with concern and care in his eyes. Gu Shijio faked a chuckle as she said, I did not want you to worry about me. That is why I did not let you know that I went into the Devil Kingdom. Shijio, you are bold. The surrounding devil aura will easily harm a pure celestial being like you. How did you get in there? With a frown, Gu Shijio answered half-jokingly, Why are you asking me so many questions? Is this an interrogation? Of course not. Shijio, it is not what you think. I'm just a little curious. Gu Shijio heaved a sigh as she added, Brother Yun, curiosity sometimes kills the cat. Yun Yanli took a step forward and said, All right. Shijio, I'll admit. I was really curious. The Devil Kingdom has been in a state of chaos, so I have always wanted to venture into the Devil Kingdom and rule the place. I wanted to give the people there a peaceful life. However, the dense devil aura has greatly limited my mobility. If you know any helpful information, please share it with me. He made his statement sound so righteous. I did not know that you wanted to become the ruler of the Devil Kingdom. What great ambition! Gu Shijio said with a tone of sarcasm. Shijio, I have wanted to put an end to their misery for some time now. In the future, I can appoint you as the Devil King. I will even consider Mr. Fui for the role if that is what pleases you. After he made his last statement, he stared at Gu Shijio intently in hopes of getting some clues from her expression. However, Gu Shijio remained composed. We can talk about this later. Brother Yun, haven't you said that there is something that you need to tell the Divine Lord? Now that no outsiders are present, I am sure that you can tell me about it, right? Yun Yanli stammered. About this? Shijio, it is not that I cannot tell you, but it is a long story. As he spoke, Yun Yanli tried to peep into the cabin, but he could not see anything as the curtains had blocked the windows. It had been 4 or 5 minutes since the guardians went into the cabin. Meanwhile, some voices could be heard from the distance. In unison they said, "Governor." 4 men appeared simultaneously around the carriage and bowed courteously towards Yun Yanli. These 4 men were the most capable subordinates that Yun Yanli had. They were also the ones who had met Guardian Jin and Guardian Hua before. The 4 of them made their way here as soon as they saw the signal. "Governor, what can we do for you?" Yun Yanli looked at Gu Shijio before asking his men, "Do you still recognize the 2 great guardians from the Devil Kingdom, Jin Mengzhou and Hua Qianjun?" The men bowed together as they said, "Yes, we do." "Great." Yun Yanli laughed out loud and grabbed Gu Zijia's hand. "Shijio, I have a show for you." Gu Shijio wanted to break free from his grasp, but she knew that she would not be able to do so. Hence, she let him hold on to her hand. "What show?" She looked somewhat confused. Yun Yanli replied with a smirk, "I am convinced that the 2 great guardians will potentially put Prince Nianmao in danger. They have used false identities to stay undercover by his side. I am here to reveal their true intentions." Chapter 2454, The Escape 3. He raised his hand, and a golden light shone towards the cabin. Bang! A loud explosion occurred. The entire cabin had been shattered into pieces. Yun Yanli was surprised by what he saw. The once elegant carriage was left with nothing but its base. No one was present inside. Could all 4 of the powerful men have perished as well? Yun Yanli knew that he had not utilized his full strength from before. Based on the capabilities of the 4 men, he was sure that they would be able to survive. Hence, he continued to look around in order to find them. All of a sudden, some dark-colored water clouded his eyes. A stream of pitch-black water was splashed directly onto his face. As the source came from a very close distance, he was unprepared. His face was immediately stained with dark ink, which temporarily blinded him. Fortunately for Yun Yanli, he had not let go of Gu Zijia's hand. As long as he had her, he still had the chance to win. He grabbed her wrist tightly with his left hand while trying to clean the ink from his face. He needed to make sure that he obtained his vision back. Before he could use the cleaning spell, he could tell that the person that was grasped in his left hand was suddenly slipping away. He quickly wiped away the black fluid that clouded his vision and was surprised by what he saw. His left hand was clearly grabbing onto a hand, but only a hand was present. Gu Shijio was nowhere to be seen. Had she sacrificed her left hand in order to escape? Yun Yanli had never expected that. He then examined himself and realized that the ink-like fluid stained his entire face as well as his robes. There was a bad smell that accompanied the ink, and Yun Yanli was unsure if it was poisonous or not. He could not care less about his dirty outfit, but he had to find those people before they escaped. In a state of panic, he looked everywhere but could only see his men. Gu Shijio was nowhere to be seen. "Where is she?" he reprimanded. His men were equally shocked by what just happened. She was still here just now," one of the men answered. "Is the lady a squid-like creature? I saw her casting a stream of black ink onto the governor's face." "Governor, we do not know if the ink is poisonous or not. You should clean it off first." His men continued to bombard him with concerns. Did she cast the ink from her mouth? He wondered. Yun Yanli was well aware of her skills in the use of poisons, but she would usually use the poison at the most unexpected time without anyone noticing it. He did not believe that she would actually cast the ink through her mouth. How did she keep so much ink in there anyway? It did not seem right. Perhaps she was not the real Gu Shijio. Yun Yanli quickly checked the hand that had been cut off. The skin felt soft and supple. Moreover, the flesh was neatly cut. It was not a horrendous sight at all. Instead, it was more like a prop with a subtle sense of horror. Yun Yanli paused a while before smelling the hand up close. His men were looking at him strangely at the time. What was the governor trying to do? Was he trying to take advantage of her amputated hand, just because he liked her? He definitely seemed like the kind of man who was into these gross things. Yun Yanli continued to sniff at the flesh. All of a sudden, he broke the silence with laughter. "This is not her hand," he said in a seemingly relaxed tone. The men were stunned. What did he mean? Before Yun Yanli could explain anything, his smile slowly faded away and was replaced by disappointment. Gu Shijio. He was obviously irritated. There was also a sense of frustration and helplessness in his mind. He flicked the amputated hand away as evil plans started to surface his mind. As the fake hand fell to the ground, he cast a streak of white light at it, turning the supple little hand into a pink, elongated arm of a squid. Needless to say, the one who engaged with him was not Gu Shijio. It was actually a squid monster that was eloquent and had the ability to change appearances. Gu Shijio and Di Fui were long gone. Even Guardian Jin and Guardian Hua had escaped too. Yun Yanli was fooled. Annoyed, he was certainly unhappy about the escape. He thought he already had her in his grasps. But right now, he realized how foolish he had been to believe so. Gu Shijio could easily escape with her teleportation skill, but he could not figure out how the squid monster managed to run away. All of his men were there, but none of them witnessed anything. "Get your weapons ready and wait for my signal. As soon as you see the signal, go after them immediately." Even though he was fooled, he was relieved by the fact that the Divine Lord was not actually here. If he was not mistaken, the squid monster must have been the one who impersonated the man. Bewildered, he never knew about the existence of such a powerful being in the Devil Kingdom. After all, he was right about his speculations. Di Fui was the new Devil King, and Gu Shijio should be the one who stole his spiritual stones the other day. She must have found out a considerable amount about his plan. He took a deep breath, and the corners of his mouth immediately turned into a wicked smile. He knew very well that Gu Shijio and the rest of them would not be able to escape from him so easily. His tracking ability was known to be the best in the entire continent. As long as they were still in the Shura world, there was no way they could avoid him. The only way they could escape was to return to the Devil Kingdom. However, the Devil Kingdom was thousands of miles away, and they had only been gone for a brief amount of time. Yun Yanli speculated that the furthest that they could go was about 300 miles. He started to plan what to do when he finally had them. He would not take things lightly anymore. His main priority was to capture Gu Shijio. He was now willing to do so by any means. As for Di Fui, there was no way he would spare his life. The Shura world was his territory, so he should be the ruler of the place. He would not tolerate any forms of disorder where he ruled. Yun Yanli immediately started to perform the spell and activated a tracking spell. Time continued to pass, and it had already been an hour since their disappearance. Yun Yanli stood in the wild, looking at his surroundings with his teeth clenched. There was a goat that was wrapped in a dress that used to belong to Gu Shijio. Yun Yanli stared at the goat, so it looked at him in return. Yun Yanli quickly snatched the dress away from it and examined it carefully. He saw a paper doll present inside the dress. All of a sudden, it burst into flames in his hand and was turned into ash before Yun Yanli could stop the fire. Yun Yanli was filled with utter indignation. His tracking spell should have followed the essence of her soul, not the scent of her body. It was rare for him to fail, but this was one of the times where he had to admit defeat. He thought that Gu Zijia's soul would be the most effective element he could use to track her down. Never had he expected that his spell would end up guiding him to the goat. The goat certainly did not bear any essence of her soul, but the paper doll was the key. Gu Shijio must have attached part of the essence of her soul on the object to misguide him, leading him on an unfruitful chase. Meanwhile, he still could not figure out how she managed to put the essence of her soul onto a piece of paper. What kind of spell had she used? Unfortunately, as the paper doll was burned, he could not examine it anymore. He killed the innocent goat and stood there in contemplation. He asked himself, where would they be hiding? He heaved a regretful sigh at the realization that since Gu Shijio knew how to make a paper doll, she could easily produce a second or even a third doll to mislead him. He had no idea what he would run into if he continued to track her soul. There could be a trap waiting for him at every corner. Therefore, he decided to change his target. Could he go after Di Fui? He was unsure, for Di Fui's soul was no longer the same. Also, he was Gu Zijia's top priority, so she would definitely make the same misleading paper dolls for him. Therefore, the result would be fruitless. However, as it would consume a great amount of her spiritual power to attach the essence of their souls onto the paper dolls, Yun Yanli guessed that Gu Shijio would not do it for everyone else. If he decided to track down Guardian Jin and Guardian Hua, he should be able to find Gu Shijio and Di Fui as well. Unfortunately, they had not physically engaged with Yun Yanli, so there was not a trace of their souls that Yun Yanli could use to make a clear path. Suddenly, he paused to think about the squid monster. He had part of the squid's arm in his possession and speculated that after the squid ran away, it would definitely go back to meet up with Gu Shijio. He laughed at the faint trace of hope that he had of finding them. The trace guided him all the way to a sea of violent waves. Waves of water washed the shore and hit the corals with mighty splashes. By the sea, a person was sitting on one of the many corals that lined the coast. The person was elegantly dressed, with hair that was smoothly combed and long enough to touch the surface of the water, swirling around as gently as a revolving seaweed. The person sat with legs crossed and looked into the distance, seemingly preoccupied. It was already evening at the time. The sky was filled with rolls of emerging red clouds. The rain of blood, which occurred once every 10 days, was about to happen very soon. The blood rain was very poisonous. It had the ability to speed up the growth of most plants but caused mutation in most animals. As for the humans, their skin would immediately be eroded as soon as they came in contact with the raindrops. There was no cure for it. To make matters worse, the rain could even harm one's soul. Some people had claimed that the bats were actually the transformation of all the souls that had died innocently in the rain. Fortunately, the sea had the ability to dilute the eroding elements in the blood rain. Hence, when the rain occurred, deep sea beings would remain unaffected. Only the animals that lived 2 or 3 meters below the surface would be harmed. Yun Yanli tracked the octopus creature all the way down here, only to find the person sitting on a coral. As the person was not facing Yun Yanli, he could not tell the gender of that individual. However, when tracing its soul, he was sure that the person must be the squid monster. Was he or she recovering by the sea? Had Gu Shijio and the rest of them dived into the sea? Alarmed, the person turned around and stared at Yun Yanli. Yun Yanli could finally see the stranger's face and was shocked. The person had an enchanting face, centered with a high nose and a pair of bright, emerald eyes that were complemented with thick lashes. The creature had lips that were attractively tinted with a shade of pale red. Every time the person blinked, his or her watery eyes glistened vividly like the waves. Dressed with dark green robes that were elegantly embellished, the person had one arm that remained uncovered. Chains of shells and pearls circled the person's wrist and jingled with every move. It was melodious. The other arm was covered, so Yun Yanli could not tell if it was still attached. However, there was no sign of any apparent injury. The person slowly rose. The individual's robes danced in the gusts of wind. Yun Yanli was astonished as the person seemed to be naked under the loose robes. His or her bare, long legs were obviously noticeable. The smooth and supple skin of the person would catch the attention of any onlooker. There was only a silver bracelet that was secured on the person's ankle without any shoes. When he or she walked, the silver bracelet shone with sparkling lights following every step. Chapter 2457. The Ladyboy, 2. Was the person a man or a woman? Yun Yanli thought that he had observed almost everything about the stranger, but he still could not identify the gender of the person. The person was very tall, about 1.87 meters in height. The individual certainly had the physique of a man. In fact, he or she appeared to be wearing a man's robe. Nonetheless, the facial features of the creature seemed to resemble that of a woman. Every move the person made was elegant and sassy. "Why are you so late? I have been waiting for you for so long." The creature looked at Yun Yanli with tearful eyes, like a young lady who had been eagerly waiting for the arrival of her loved one. Yun Yanli was dumbstruck. Quietly, he performed a spell at his fingertips. "Do you have anything to do with Di Fui?" "Make a guess," the creature said while giving him a wink. Yun Yanli answered in an unimpressed tone, "You are one of his followers." "Silly. Why did you ask when you already knew?" The man flicked his fingers in a feminine manner. Could the stranger actually be a woman? "Where is Di Fui? Where is everyone?" Yun Yanli took another intimidating step towards the creature. His aura was so strong that none of the approaching waves managed to touch him. They just rolled away in different directions. "You sound so fierce." The creature took a step back and accidentally slipped and fell right into the water. Was Di Fui's comrade trying to escape by aqua drilling? Yun Yanli smiled smugly. Now that he had found the person, he would not let him or her go so easily like the first time. At that very moment, he slowly moved his fingers in a wave-like motion while seemingly clenching his fist. Immediately, the surrounding waves started to turn more and more violent. It seemed to be forming into the shape of a net. At the very center of the net lay the squid monster, seemingly helpless. The creature stood in the middle of the water net. The person's hair and clothes were thoroughly soaked. It winked again, and soon, droplets of water flowed from its thick lashes and streamed down its fair, lustrous cheeks, making it look like a beautiful woman in tears. The creature stared at Yun Yanli and asked, "How can a handsome man like you not know how to appreciate the beauty of a delicate woman? Did you really that I am merely a fish that you can capture with a net?" The stranger demanded, with a tone that indicated that it was rather annoyed. The answer was simple. Yun Yanli had seen more beautiful women than grains of sands. Most of the time, he did not even have a proper appreciation for their beauty. He gave the stranger a tight smile while clenching his fist. The water net resonated with his gesture and slowly tightened towards the center, strangling the creature more and more. "I now ask you again. Where are Di Fui and the rest of them? If you refuse to tell me, I will cut you into 8 parts. The water net continued to squeeze the creature, but it did not even struggle one bit. "I will not tell you even if you are going to slice me into 18 pieces, he proudly said. He was a really stubborn man. Yun Yanli ignored its response and continued to tighten the net. The net was operated with a great amount of spiritual power and was able to execute many deadly attacks. The water net had now sliced through the innermost layer of the creature's clothes and started cutting into its flesh and veins. Other than its ability to impersonate others, the creature seemed to have no actual power. It could not break free from the water net. However, as the creature managed to escape the first time, Yun Yanli paid extra attention to it and watched it intently this time. "Ah, you are so cruel. How can you do this to me?" The creature began to sound teary. Yun Yanli gave him a hiss and disregarded the remark. The creature then deliberately winked its tearful eyes at Yun Yanli. "I guess I am not attractive enough. Should I take off my clothes?" it murmured. Yun Yanli did not know what to say. The stranger was obviously very open about its looks. Chapter 2458. The Ladyboy, 3. Yun Yanli seemed to have the impression that all the people from the Devil Kingdom were rather open and unshamed. Before Yun Yanli could continue questioning the man, the rare sight of the stranger's robes melting away caught his attention. First, the creature revealed its bare shoulders. Then, it revealed its refined arms, followed by its bare chest. Panicked, Yun Yanli quickly looked away. Something did not seem right. Did the stranger have a flat chest? It certainly seemed to be the case. Yun Yanli wanted to turn around and have another look, but that was when everything changed. A wave of dark water was approaching him in a violent motion. It was the same tactic again. Swiftly, Yun Yanli managed to keep the dark water a few feet away from him. He raised his hand to cast a spell that immediately formed a blue wall that could shield and keep the dark water away. The water had collided with the shield with a powerful force that would have shattered any ordinary objects. When the dark waves faded, Yun Yanli quickly checked on the creature and realized that the person was long gone. He was speechless. Although he had shifted part of his spiritual power toward the creation of the shield, he had not loosened the water net that had captured the creature. How did the individual escape? Yun Yanli looked around, but could not see anyone. All he could see were the waves. How did the creature get away so quickly? He cursed to vent his anger. Damn it! You ladyboy! The stranger with a beautiful face turned out to be a man, leaving Yun Yanli puzzled. He stood there and put an evil smile on his face. Not even the roaring waves could stop his search. Nothing would stop him. With the powers of a great deity, he would still possess good control even in the water. The sea was no obstacle to him at all. He lunged into the water at full speed and went right into the depths of the sea. As he was getting deeper into the ocean, he recalled a conversation that he had with Gu Shijio many years ago about a crystal palace that was hidden beneath the sea. Every time she was troubled, she would spend her time in the palace to contemplate her next move. That was when he realized that she was actually a good swimmer. Hence, it was likely that she would have brought Di Fui somewhere deep in the ocean to keep him safe. Perhaps, there was a crystal palace within the depths of the water here in the Shuro world as well. Furthermore, the blood rain was about to pour, so Gu Shijio definitely needed to find a safe place to hide. There were only two places that she could seek shelter from the rain, the ocean or Lagua City. These were the only two places that were within their reach before dusk. Since the creature that he was going after was a member of the sea, he had more reasons to believe that Gu Shijio and Di Fui were indeed hiding in the water. Furthermore, Lagua City was under the complete control of Yun Yanli, hence, the sea was obviously a safer option. At full speed, Yun Yanli traveled just like a missile. Soon he found a trace of the squid man from before. Most tracking spells would fail in the water, as all of the targets sent would be hidden. However, the tracking spell that Yun Yanli used would target one's soul. Therefore, even though the squid man was already in the water, Yun Yanli was still able to track him down. The squid man had tricked him far too many times for his liking, so he could barely contain his frustration any longer. He was eager to capture the creature again and find the crystal palace where Gu Shijio and Di Fui would be hiding. It would be best if he could round up the whole lot at once. Very soon, Yun Yanli was already at the bottom of the sea. Yun Yanli studied the area but did not find any hideout. There were only some corals, seaweed, green algae, and all kinds of fishes and sea creatures. Without the crystal palace to provide them with refuge, Gu Shijio and Di Fui couldn't stay underwater for an extended period. Disappointed, he started to doubt his thoughts. Could it be that Gu Shijio and Di Fui were never here? Had they gone to Lagua City instead? Perhaps, the squid man was just a distraction? It would appear that he fell for another trick. Yun Yanli clenched his fists tightly in frustration. He had fought along with Gu Shijio before, and the two of them had overcome many obstacles together, so he thought that he knew her style quite well. Gu Shijio had once told him that the most dangerous place would often turn out to be the safest. Hence, they could be hiding in his residence back in Lagua City. The sudden thought made Yun Yanli very anxious. He could no longer care about the squid man and wanted to return to Lagua City as soon as possible. However, in the distance, he noticed some movements in the water, as if something swimming by him. Even though he was initially puzzled, the answer came to him very quickly when he caught the scent of the squid man. Therefore, he had a change of plan. It would take him at least 4 hours to return to Lagua City, and there was a chance that he would find nothing there. Nonetheless, if the squid man was one of Di Fui's trusted men, he could capture him and use him as a bait to drive Gu Shijio and Di Fui out of hiding. That way, he would have leverage on them rather than blindly chasing them around the place. Yun Yanli quickly surveyed the area as he knew that the squid man was nearby. He knew that the man was swimming in different directions around him just to get him confused. Perhaps, the man was using some invisibility spell. This made Yun Yanli annoyed, and he could no longer suppress his urge to kill the creature. "Find your way through," he called out while casting a spell. All of a sudden, a streak of bright light surrounded Yun Yanli's body and broke away in a violent expansion, transmitting energy outwards like a massive shockwave. Through the waves, the man could finally be seen. This time, he was wearing another set of dark blue robes, which shared the same color as the sea. Obviously injured, he shed some blood as soon as the waves brushed him through. "Damn it, ladyboy. There is no way you can escape this time." His lips curved upward at its edges as a self-satisfied smirk appeared on Yun Yanli's face. At that very moment, he started launching deadly attacks at the squid man that only a great deity was capable of performing. The man noticed that things were taking a quick, dangerous turn, so he wanted to escape. A swift turn had caused him to run into an ice wall that blocked his way. Caught in a daze, he was still determined not to engage. He turned to another direction and soon realized that the surrounding water was quickly turning into ice. Soon he was unable to move. "How dare you challenge me, you insignificant squid monster? What an overconfident creature!" Yun Yanli stood before the big ice cube and looked at the squid monster with an egotistic smile. The man was not able to move but was still conscious. "How blind!" he called out. Yun Yanli did not quite understand the man's reply. However, he could see that the man continued to wink his eyes charmingly. Soon, his long, thick lashes brushed across the surface of the ice. "Have you ever seen a squid monster with my unparalleled beauty? What are you then?" The man smiled as he said, "Guess." As attractive as a blossoming flower, his smiling face was the only thing that was worth paying attention to in the sea of plain, dull water. His eyes glistened along with his smile, which looked like stars in the night sky. The man was trying to use the bewitching spell to make Yun Yanli get rid of the ice cube. Only members of his species knew how to utilize this spell. Yun Yanli smiled at him and added softly, "I hate guessing. If you refuse to tell me, I shall end your life right here." Chapter 2460. The inducement. Yun Yanli launched a strike at the big ice cube. The attack did not break the ice but somehow managed to hurt the man inside the ice cube. The attack severely hurt the victim, and the complexion on his face slowly faded away. He could not help but spit out a few mouthfuls of blood. His blood had stained almost every corner of the ice on the inside. Shocked, Yun Yanli finally noticed that the man's body was slowly melting away. Could he be a jellyfish? Once a jellyfish dies, it would just melt away in the water. Yun Yanli had fallen for a few of the man's trick, so he dared not make another move just yet. He tried to read the man's pulse by placing his hand on the surface of the ice. To his dismay, he found out that the man was slowly losing signs of life. The realization surprised Yun Yanli, as he did not want the creature to die right away. If the creature died, he would lose his leverage against Di Fui and Gu Shijio. Hence, he quickly performed a spell to melt the ice away and was shocked to realize that the creature's body no longer had any colors. As soon as the ice disappeared, the man collapsed to the bottom of the sea, seemingly lifeless. Strangely, even the blue robes that he was wearing turned white. Meanwhile, the look on his face slowly turned pale as he swayed along with the current lifelessly. Yun Yanli could not watch him die. He stuffed a pill into the man's mouth that could help him recover. In order to prevent the man from playing any tricks, he put his hand around the man's weakest point while feeding the pill to him. In case of an unexpected event, he would launch another strike at the man. After he fed him with the pill, the man still remained lifeless. Yun Yanli suspected that the man had died since there was no pulse present. Also, the man did not swallow the pill. It remained in his mouth. Was the man dead? Could he really be so fragile? Yun Yanli was aware that he had launched a deadly strike. Even a golden immortal would be greatly severely wounded, so this junior immortal would certainly have felt its effects. The man did not possess a high degree of spiritual power. All he had were some weird, surprising moves. Moreover, Yun Yanli had yet to figure out the man's species. Perhaps he was a fragile creature. Having regretted his actions, Yun Yanli lowered his body in an attempt to check if the man was breathing. With his other hand, he placed his palm on the man's chest while trying to channel some spiritual power to keep him alive. What happened next was completely out of Yun Yanli's expectations. If he could choose again, he would let the creature die. However, there was no way to turn back time. Yun Yanli had to admit that he had fallen for another trick. The seemingly lifeless man bounced back to life as soon as Yun Yanli touched his chest. The man's small, delicate mouth opened up widely and fiercely as he took a quick bite of Yun Yanli's hand. Yun Yanli's spiritual power was usually strong enough to keep his skin protected from attacks, but to his surprise, the man's protruding, canine teeth managed to punch 2 holes through his skin. Out of anger, Yun Yanli launched a strike that hit the man's chest. He was sent across the water. As the creature's teeth were still sunk into Yun Yanli's skin when he was pushed across the water, it made the wound worse and caused blood to ooze out of his hand, staining the surrounding water burgundy. Yun Yanli found himself poisoned, and the pain was 10 times greater than any form of external cut that Yun Yanli had ever suffered. He could not help but shiver in cold sweats. Thinking on his feet, he quickly used his spiritual power to drive out the toxins in his body. Meanwhile, he quickly tried to spot the squid man. The man was severely wounded by the strike and lay floating in the water. He seemed to be coughing uncontrollably. The creature intended to run but fell right into the trap that Yun Yanli had prepared for him. The creature found itself caught in a tight net, which left him with no space to even shift his body. It decided to stop struggling. Yun Yanli, were you a fisherman in your previous life? Where did you learn to make so many nets? Yun Yanli ignored him completely. He only focused on driving the toxins out of his body. He had brought many pills with him, and some of which were really effective antitoxins. Although he consumed the appropriate pills shortly after being poisoned, the wound was still excruciating. Hence, he continued to squeeze the purple blood out of his hand until he saw that his blood was finally cleansed. The blood returned to its usual red tone. He then dressed the wound before dragging the net to the surface of the water. The man looked delicate but was unusually heavy. After swimming for a while, Yun Yanli's arms started to turn sore. In fact, he suffered from minor blackouts due to exhaustion. Carrying the man to the surface was as if dragging a mountain. It was unusually tiring. How could the man be so heavy? Yun Yanli threw a quick glance at the man and saw him resting with his eyes closed. His face was still as pale as a sheet. He stayed completely still like a lifeless statue. Perhaps the man was playing dead again. Yun Yanli would not fall for another trap. If the man was dead, he could always hang his body at the top of the city gate to lure Gu Shijio into his trap. Tired, Yun Yanli did not want to think about the man anymore. He had spent a great amount of time underwater, and his chest was starting to hurt. He had to return to the surface as soon as possible. He needed to get his men to search Lagua City as quickly as possible. After swimming for a while more, he realized that something was not quite right. His vision slowly darkened, and he could barely feel his legs. He wanted to speed up but was halted by a sudden change in his body. He quickly looked around and was shocked by what he found. Many pitch-black sharks emerged close by. There were at least a dozen sharks, and each of them was twice the size of a normal shark. The sharks were all equipped with many teeth that were as sharp as swords. As soon as he noticed them, they started attacking. Even in his current state, Yun Yanli still believed that he could take them down. He raised his hand, and an emerald sword immediately appeared on his palm. As soon as the sword appeared, it was accompanied by a brief, high-pitched but ghostly sound that was quite uneasy to bear. He knew that the sharks would do nothing to him once they heard the sounds. He would fight the sharks and make it clear to them that he was not someone that they should be messing with. About an hour later, all the sharks were floating lifelessly on the surface of the sea. All of their stomachs were slashed open, staining the sea with a large pool of blood. Meanwhile, Yun Yanli floated effortlessly to the surface of the water while trying to catch his breath. The fight for survival had drained all of his energy, but now that all the sharks were dead, he could finally have a moment to rest. Blood was pouring from the sky, eroding the bodies of the dead sharks and turning them into skeletons. Oddly enough, Yun Yanli's body was not affected at all by the blood rain. The bloody bats were not interested in him as well. They rushed from the sky and went towards the sharks to feed on the barely remaining flesh. You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.